The farmer knelt in the damp straw, his breath hitching in the quiet of the coop. Something caught the sliver of morning light filtering through the slats. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they closed around a heavy, rounded object. It was not stone, it was not wood. He pulled it into the light, and the surface shimmered with a dense, metallic luster. A golden egg. He wiped the dust away with his palm, feeling the cold, smooth weight of it press against his skin. The metal felt impossibly dense, vibrating with a promise that made his pulse quicken. He stared at the object, turning it over and over, watching the light dance across the polished surface. The coop, once a place of mundane labor, suddenly felt like the center of the world. He pressed the egg against his chest, his hands shaking harder now, not from the chill of the morning, but from the sudden, sharp realization that the hunger of the past years was about to end. He stood up slowly, the egg gripped tight, and walked toward the door, leaving the shadows of the coop behind. The market was a cacophony of shouting vendors and grinding cartwheels, but the farmer moved through the crowd with a singular focus. He found a merchant near the edge of the square, a man with eyes that assessed value in a glance. The farmer placed the golden object onto the wooden table. The merchant stopped mid-sentence. He picked it up, weighed it, and scratched the surface with a thumbnail. A slow nod followed. He reached under his counter and produced a heavy leather pouch, sliding it across the wood. The sound of silver clinking against silver was the loudest thing the farmer had ever heard. He took the pouch, the weight pulling his arm down, and turned away from the stall without looking back. The walk home felt different. The road beneath his boots was the same, but the hunger that usually gnawed at his stomach had vanished, replaced by the rhythmic thud of the coins against his thigh. He reached his gate as the sun dipped low. He stood for a moment, looking at the small, dilapidated house. He stepped inside, the door creaking on its rusted hinges, and set the pouch on the table. It landed with a solid, final thud. He was a man with a future. The next morning, the coop was silent, save for the soft scratching of claws in the dirt. The farmer found the hen in the same corner, and there, nestled in the straw, lay another golden egg. He reached down, his fingers closing around the cool, smooth surface. It was no longer a miracle, but a schedule. He began to work. He climbed onto the roof, tearing away the rotting thatch, then replacing it with heavy slate tiles that held firm against the wind. The rain would no longer drip onto his floor. Inside, he dragged the lumpy, straw-filled mat out to the yard and burned it. In its place, he hauled in a sturdy wooden bed frame, its surface polished and solid beneath his hand. He cleared the cupboards of dust and filled the pantry shelves with heavy sacks of fine flour and rows of salted meat. He spent his afternoons walking through the village, no longer keeping his head bowed or his eyes on the ground. He stood straight, his boots striking the earth with a new, deliberate rhythm. When he returned home, he sat at his table and watched the sun climb over the hills. Knowing the coop held the means to maintain this life, the routine that once provided comfort began to feel like a cage. The farmer stood in the coop at dawn, his shadow long and thin against the dirt. He watched the hen. She pecked at a patch of dry earth, moved 2 inches to the left, and pecked again. He tapped his boot against the wooden slats of the coop, the rhythmic sound echoing in the small space. He looked up at the sky, tracing the sun's slow climb over the eastern ridge. It was moving too slowly. He looked back at the bird. She scratched at the ground with a rhythmic, indifferent motion. Oblivious to the man standing over her, he checked the sun again. The light had barely shifted. He shifted his weight, his knuckles white, as he gripped the top rail of the coop. 1 egg a day is too slow, he muttered. He stared at the hen's belly, his eyes narrowing as he tracked the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Every peck she took felt like a deliberate insult. He paced the length of the coop, his boots kicking up dust. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the bird, and his jaw tightened. The weight was an obstacle. The idea took root in his mind, growing until it crowded out everything else. He looked at the hen and no longer saw a bird. He saw a vessel. He imagined a mountain of gold, a vast, shimmering hoard packed tight within her. waiting for someone to claim it. Why wait for the slow, daily trickle when the entire fortune could be his in a single moment? He turned away from the coop and walked back toward the house. His boots crunched on the dry earth, a steady, heavy sound that matched the thrumming in his temples. He stepped into the kitchen. The table was cluttered with the remnants of his morning meal. He reached out, his fingers brushing past a wooden bowl, and closed his hand around the handle of a sharp kitchen knife. The steel was cold, the blade catching the dim light of the room. He tested the edge against his thumb, feeling the bite of the metal. He did not look back. He walked out the door and crossed the yard, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the dirt floor of the coop. The hen was still there, pecking at the straw, unaware of the man standing in the doorway. He gripped the knife tighter, his knuckles bone white, and stepped into the coop. The hen looked up, her head tilting to one side. She let out a low, soft cluck, a sound that vibrated in the quiet of the coop. The farmer stood frozen for a heartbeat, the blade held steady in his grip. The light filtered through the gaps in the wall, casting thin, sharp lines across the straw. He did not blink. He did not wait for the bird to turn away. He shifted his weight, his boots digging into the dirt floor, and swung the blade in a single, fluid arc. The motion was precise, driven by the weight of his obsession. The metal sliced through the air, finding its mark before the bird could move. There was a brief, sharp flutter of wings, a sudden resistance against the steel, and then it was over. The hen collapsed into the straw. The movement stopped instantly. The coop went quiet. The only sound left was the farmer's own ragged breathing, sharp and uneven in the stillness. He stood over the small, motionless form, the knife still held tight in his hand. The silence was heavy, pressing down on the space, replacing the scratching of claws. He dropped to his knees, his boots sinking into the damp straw. He did not look at the bird as a creature anymore. He looked at it as a container. He reached out, his fingers slick and trembling, and parted the feathers. He pulled the skin back with a sharp, tearing sound that echoed. His hands were stained dark, the color deepening as he worked. He dug his fingers deeper, pushing aside the organs, searching for the hard, metallic glint of gold. He moved with a frantic, jerky rhythm, tossing aside common entrails that spilled out onto the dirt floor. He probed every cavity, his breath hitching in his chest as he shifted the weight of the carcass. There was nothing but soft tissue and the smell of raw iron. He wiped his hands on his legs, but the stain only smeared, leaving dark streaks across his skin. He plunged his hands back into the remains, digging with a desperate, clawing motion, trying to find a hidden cache, a secret compartment, anything. His fingers met only bone and empty space. He pulled his hands back, holding them up in the dim light. They were empty. The straw around him was stained, but there was no treasure. The knife slipped from his fingers, hitting the stone floor with a sharp, metallic ring that seemed to vibrate through the entire coop. He stared at the blade, then back at the remains, his jaw tight. He grabbed the carcass by the legs and shook it, once, twice, with a violent, jerking motion. He expected the heavy thud of gold to hit the dirt, but there was only the limp, hollow weight of flesh. He shook it harder, his knuckles white, his breath coming in jagged, shallow gasps. Nothing fell. No glint of metal, no promise of wealth, just the dull, lifeless reality of what he had destroyed. He let the remains drop back into the straw. The silence of the coop was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a physical weight. He turned his gaze toward the corner. The nest was empty. The straw, once the cradle of his fortune, was now just dry, broken stalks. He reached out, his hand hovering over the spot where the golden eggs had appeared every morning. But he did not touch it. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a cold, hollow ache in his chest. He looked at his hands, then at the nest, and finally at the door, where the light of the outside world seemed distant and unreachable. The source of his life was gone, and in its place, there was only the quiet, suffocating truth of his own hands. He stumbled out of the coop, his boots dragging through the dirt. The yard was still, the air cooling, as the sun dipped behind the jagged line of the hills. He did not look back at the coop. He did not look at the tools he had left behind. He walked to the threshold of his house and lowered himself onto the wooden step. His legs felt heavy, as if the ground were pulling at him. He sat there, his shoulders hunched, staring at the dust swirling in the fading light. The silence of the farm was absolute. There was no clucking, no movement in the straw, no promise of the morning. He looked down at his hands, still stained by the act that had cost him everything. He wiped them against the dry wood of the step, but the marks remained. The sun vanished behind the hills, casting the yard into a long gray shadow. He thought of the jar inside, holding the last of his silver coins. It was a finite sum, a dwindling pile that would never grow again. He had traded his future for a moment of greed, and now the cost was clear. He sat motionless as the twilight deepened into night. There was no more gold to trade. There was no more hen to provide. There was only the dirt beneath his feet and the hollow, suffocating quiet of a life that had reached its final, empty end. He did not move. He simply watched the darkness swallow the yard, knowing that when the sun rose again, it would bring nothing but the same cold, silent reality.